Sarah Mitchell drove slowly down Main Street of Riverdale, the same street she'd ridden her bike on as a little girl. After 8 years away, the familiar sights both comforted and unsettled her. The old movie theater still stood, though its marquee now advertised community events instead of films. Donovan's Hardware had a fresh coat of paint, but the same bell that jingled when the door opened. The town looked smaller somehow, more worn around the edges. It had been 6 months since Sarah's honorable discharge from the Army, 6 months of trying to find her place in the civilian world again. At 34, she felt decades older than the carefree young woman who had left Riverdale to serve her country. The scars she carried weren't all visible, but they were always present, like unwelcome companions that never left her side. Sarah parked her faded blue pickup truck in front of her parents' house, a modest 2-story home with white siding and blue shutters. Her father had passed away while she was deployed on her second tour, and her mother now lived alone with her memories and her garden. The flower beds looked immaculate, bursts of color against the green lawn, her mother's way of keeping busy, of finding beauty in a world that had taken her husband too soon. "There's my girl," Martha Mitchell called from the porch, wiping her hands on her gardening apron. Though in her 70s now, Martha moved with the energy of someone 20 years younger. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, her smile warm as summer sunshine as she hurried down the steps to embrace her daughter. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said, returning the hug, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender soap. "House looks good." "Oh, same as always," Martha replied, stepping back to look at her daughter. "You're too thin. Come inside and let me fix you something to eat." Sarah followed her mother into the house, ducking slightly as she passed through the doorway. At 5'10", she had always been tall for a woman, a trait that served her well in the military but made her stand out in civilian life in ways she didn't always want. Inside, the house was exactly as Sarah remembered, family photos on the walls, the old grandfather clock ticking steadily in the corner, the smell of cinnamon and apples that seemed permanently embedded in the kitchen. She eased into a chair at the kitchen table, stretching out her right leg. The old injury rarely bothered her now, but long drives still made it ache. "How's the leg today?" Martha asked, putting on the kettle for tea. "Fine," Sarah said automatically, the answer she always gave regardless of the truth. "Just stiff from the drive." Martha gave her a knowing look but didn't press. "I made up your old room. Thought you might want to rest before dinner with Tom and his family tonight." "Tom's in town?" Sarah perked up at the mention of her older brother who had moved to Chicago years ago. "Just for the weekend. His boys wanted to see their grandma." Martha smiled as she set a mug of tea in front of Sarah. "And their aunt the hero, of course." Sarah stared down at the steaming mug. "Mom, I've told you." I know," Martha interrupted gently. "No hero talk, but those boys look up to you whether you like it or not." Sarah nodded but said nothing. How could she explain to her nephews, ages 7 and 9, what it really meant to serve? How could she tell them about the weight of the decisions she'd made, the friends she'd lost, the nightmares that still woke her in a cold sweat? After tea, Sarah unpacked her modest belongings in her childhood bedroom. The walls were still the soft yellow she'd chosen at 16, though her mother had replaced the band posters with framed nature prints. The shelf above the desk still held her high school swimming trophies and a few dog-eared novels. She opened the bottom drawer of the dresser and reached to the back, finding the small wooden box exactly where she'd left it. Her fingers traced the carved lid before she opened it, revealing the metal inside. The bronze star with the V device for valor gleamed dully in the afternoon light. Sarah closed the box quickly and returned it to its hiding place. Some memories were best kept locked away. That evening, dinner with Tom and his family was a whirlwind of noise and questions. Her nephews, Jason and Michael, peppered her with questions about tanks and helicopters, their understanding of military life clearly shaped by video games and movies. "Did you shoot bad guys, Aunt Sarah?" Jason asked, his mouth full of mashed potatoes. "Jason," his mother, Karen, scolded. "That's not an appropriate question." "It's okay," Sarah said, though it wasn't. "I was a combat medic. My job was helping people who got hurt." "Like a doctor?" Michael asked. "Something like that," Sarah replied, grateful when Tom changed the subject to the boys' baseball team. Later, after the boys had gone to bed and Karen was helping Martha with the dishes, Tom joined Sarah on the back porch. The night was cool, crickets chirping in the darkness beyond the yellow porch light. You look good, sis, Tom said, though his eyes held concern. How are you really doing? Sarah shrugged, taking it day by day, looking for work, trying to figure out what comes next. Any luck on the job front? Some interviews, nothing solid yet. She didn't mention the awkward silences when potential employers realized her skills didn't easily translate to civilian work, or how some seemed uncomfortable with the idea of hearing a female veteran. Well, I might have something, Tom said, sipping his beer. Remember Jim Carson? He runs that security firm now, has contracts all over the state. Said he'd be happy to talk to you. Security guard, huh? Sarah tried to keep the disappointment from her voice. Tom sighed. It's a foot in the door, Sarah, and honest work. I know, thanks, Tom, I appreciate it. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds. You thought about talking to someone? Tom finally asked. About everything. Sarah stiffened. I'm fine. Sure you are. That's why Mom says you barely sleep and jump at loud noises. Mom shouldn't be talking about me behind my back, Sarah said sharply. She's worried, we all are. Tom's voice was gentle. What happened over there? Is over, Sarah cut him off. I'm dealing with it my own way. Before Tom could respond, Martha stepped onto the porch. Everything okay out here? Fine, Mom, Sarah said, standing up. I think I'll turn in, long day tomorrow. The next morning, Sarah woke early, a habit from her military days she couldn't seem to break. She went for a run through the quiet streets of Riverdale, the familiar route taking her past the high school, the library, and finally to Riverdale Park. The park was empty at this hour, the playground equipment still wet with dew. Sarah slowed to a walk, her breathing steady as she approached the small Veterans Memorial near the center of the park. It was nothing fancy, a simple stone monument with the names of local men and women who had served in various conflicts. Her father's name was there, World War Vietnam section. As she stood reading the names, a voice called out behind her. Sarah Mitchell, is that you? She turned to see an older man approaching, walking a small brown dog on a leash. It took her a moment to recognize Chief Bill Donovan, Riverdale's longtime police chief and her father's old fishing buddy. Chief, she said with a nod, good morning. It's just Bill now, he said with a smile, extending his hand. Retired 2 years ago. Your mom mentioned you were coming home. How long you been back? Just visiting, Sarah clarified, shaking his hand. Got in yesterday. Bill studied her face. You look like your dad, you know that. He'd be proud of you. Sarah looked away, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. How's retirement treating you? Can't complain. Fish when I want, sleep in when I don't. He chuckled, then his expression grew more serious. Listen, if you're planning to stick around, the department's always looking for good people. Your service experience would be valuable. Thanks, but I'm not sure what I'm doing yet, Sarah said. Well, think about it. Town could use someone with your training. Bill's dog tugged at the leash, impatient to continue the walk. I should get going. Good to see you, Sarah. Welcome home. As he walked away, Sarah turned back to the memorial, her fingers tracing her father's name. She wondered what he would think of her now, of the choices she'd made, of the person she'd become. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the group of teenagers entering the park until she heard their laughter. 3 boys, maybe 16 or 17, were passing a small bottle between them, clearly trying to drain it before continuing on their way. Sarah frowned. It was barely 7 a.m. on a Sunday. As she watched, one of the boys pulled out a can of spray paint and approached the Veterans Memorial. Hey, Sarah called sharply, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to giving orders. What do you think you're doing? The boys turned, startled. The one with the spray paint, a lanky kid with shaggy blonde hair, smirked. None of your business, lady. Sarah walked toward them, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. That's a memorial you're about to vandalize. Show some respect. Respect, another boy scoffed. For what? Some old war? Sarah felt anger flare inside her. For the people who served, people like my father. The first boy shrugged, then deliberately raised the spray can toward the stone. Something snapped inside Sarah. In 2 quick strides, she was in front of him, her hand gripping his wrist firmly enough to make him gasp. Drop it, she said quietly, her voice level but with an edge that made all 3 boys suddenly very still. The spray can clattered to the ground. Sarah released the boy's wrist and stepped back. Pick it up and get out of here. The boys hesitated. Then the leader grabbed the can and they hurried away, casting nervous glances back at her. Sarah stood there, her heart racing, hands trembling slightly with adrenaline and anger. She hadn't felt that rush since. That was impressive. She turned to see a woman watching her from the jogging path. She was around Sarah's age, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and sharp, observant eyes. "Just doing what anyone would do," Sarah said, suddenly self-conscious. "Not anyone," the woman replied, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm Alina Diaz, by the way, Riverdale's new police chief." Sarah shook her hand, surprised. "Sarah Mitchell, just visiting my mom." "Mitchell?" Alina's eyebrows rose. "Any relation to Thomas Mitchell? He was before my time, but his reputation in the department is legendary." "My father," Sarah said. "I see the apple didn't fall far from the tree," Alina said with a smile. "Those boys will think twice before trying that again." She paused, studying Sarah with interest. "Military." Sarah nodded. "Army 8 years." "Thought so, that stance the way you handled those kids, textbook." Alina glanced at her watch. "I should continue my run, but it was nice meeting you, Sarah. If you're ever looking for work in Riverdale, come see me. We could use someone with your training." As Alina jogged away, Sarah stood alone by the memorial, a strange feeling settling over her. 2 job offers in one morning, both from people who saw value in her military experience rather than discomfort. Maybe coming home wasn't such a bad idea after all. 2 weeks turned into a month, and Sarah's visit to Riverdale slowly transformed into something more permanent. The security job Tom had mentioned fell through, but Chief Diaz's offer hadn't been empty words. After a series of interviews and background checks, Sarah found herself with a badge and uniform, patrolling the streets of her hometown as Riverdale's newest police officer. The work was nothing like her military service. Traffic stops and noise complaints were a far cry from combat zones. But there was comfort in the structure, in having clear protocols to follow and a chain of command to work within. And unlike some of the bigger city departments that had interviewed her, Riverdale PD seemed to value her experience rather than view it with suspicion. "Mitchell, you're with Rays today," Chief Diaz announced during morning briefing, 6 weeks into Sarah's new job. "He's showing you the ropes on the domestic dispute protocols." Officer Marco Rays, a veteran of the department with 15 years under his belt, nodded to Sarah from across the room. At 45, he was one of the older officers on the force, with salt and pepper hair and the steady demeanor of someone who had seen it all but hadn't let it harden him. "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied, gathering her notebook and coffee. As they walked to the patrol car, Rays gave her a sidelong glance. "How you settling in, Mitchell?" "Fine, sir," Sarah said automatically, then caught herself. This wasn't the army. "I mean pretty well, everyone's been helpful." "Good to hear." Rays slid into the driver's seat. "And drop the sir business, makes me feel old, Marco works fine." Sarah nodded, relaxing slightly as they pulled out of the station parking lot. Over the next few hours, they responded to a minor fender bender, checked on an elderly resident whose medical alert had gone off accidentally, and stopped by the high school to talk with the resource officer about an upcoming safety drill. Just after lunch, the call came in. "All units, we have a possible 1016 at 842 Maple Street. Neighbor reports shouting and sounds of breaking glass." Rays picked up the radio. "Unit 3 responding, ETA 4 minutes. He flipped on the lights but not the siren as he made a quick U-turn. "Domestic," he explained to Sarah. "Franklin residents, 3rd call this month." "Regulars?" Sarah asked, mentally preparing herself. "Unfortunately, Jim Franklin, local contractor. Drinking problem. Wife's name is Diane, works at the hospital. 2 kids, but they should be at school this time of day." As they approached the modest ranch-style house on Maple Street, Sarah could hear the shouting even before they exited the vehicle. A woman in a bathrobe stood nervously on the neighboring lawn, wringing her hands. "Officers, thank goodness," she said. "It's been going on for nearly an hour. I'm worried about Diane." "Stay back, ma'am," Rays instructed, then turned to Sarah. "Standard procedure. I'll take the lead, you stay alert and watch my back. Never know what we're walking into with these calls." Sarah nodded, following Rays up the concrete walkway. The front door was slightly ajar, the yelling clearer now, a man's voice slurred with alcohol despite the early hour. Rays knocked firmly. "Police, open up." The shouting stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of heavy footsteps. The door swung open to reveal a stocky man in his 40s, unshaven and red-faced, wearing a stained t-shirt and jeans. "What?" he demanded, the smell of whiskey wafting from him. "Mr. Franklin," Reyes kept his voice level. "We received a call about a disturbance. Mind if we come in and make sure everything's okay?" Franklin's bloodshot eyes darted from Reyes to Sarah, narrowing when he saw her. "Since when does Riverdale have lady cops? Don't need any help, especially not from some girl playing dress-up." Sarah kept her expression neutral, though she felt a familiar heat rising in her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such comments in the military or since, and she doubted it would be the last. "Sir, we need to check that everyone in the home is safe," she said calmly. "Everything's fine," Franklin snapped. "Just a disagreement with the wife, nothing for you to worry about." "Jim, who is it?" A woman's voice called from inside, sounding shaky. "Police," Reyes answered before Franklin could. "Ma'am, could you come to the door, please?" Franklin's jaw tightened, but he stepped back reluctantly. A moment later, a slender woman with auburn hair appeared beside him. Sarah immediately noticed the red mark on her cheek and the way she held her left wrist protectively. "Mrs. Franklin," Sarah said gently, "are you all right?" "She's fine," Franklin interrupted. Clumsy as usual, walked into a cabinet door. Diane Franklin's eyes flicked to her husband, then back to the officers. "Yes, I'm fine. Just embarrassed about the neighbors calling you all out here for nothing." "Would you mind speaking with us privately for a moment, Mrs. Franklin?" Sarah asked, meeting the woman's gaze directly. "She said she's fine," Franklin insisted, stepping closer to his wife. "Now, unless you have a warrant, I'd appreciate it if you'd get off my property." Reyes maintained his calm demeanor. "Sir, we're just doing our job. If everything's fine, we'll be on our way shortly." While Reyes continued talking with Franklin, Sarah noticed something behind them in the living room. A framed family photo on the wall with broken glass, and beyond that, a kitchen with chairs overturned and dishes shattered on the floor. "Mrs. Franklin," Sarah said, "would you like to step outside with me for a moment, just to get some air?" Before Diane could answer, Franklin moved between them. "She doesn't need to go anywhere. This is my house, and I want you both to leave now." "Jim, please," Diane said softly. "Let's not make this worse." "Shut up," he hissed at her, then turned back to the officers. "You heard me, get out." Sarah saw the situation escalating. Franklin's hands were clenching into fists, his breathing becoming more rapid. She'd seen that look before, the precursor to violence. "Mr. Franklin," she said firmly, "I need you to step back and lower your voice." "Or what?" he sneered, stepping toward her. "What's a little thing like you gonna do? Shoot me for yelling in my own house?" "No one's shooting anyone," Reyes interjected. "But if you don't calm down, we might have to talk downtown instead of here." Something changed in Franklin's expression then. A sudden darkening, a loss of whatever tenuous control he'd been maintaining. Without warning, he shoved Reyes backward and lunged for Sarah. Sarah's training kicked in instantly. She sidestepped his charge, using his momentum against him as she grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back in a controlled takedown. Within seconds, Franklin was face down on his own porch, Sarah's knee in the small of his back as she secured handcuffs around his wrists. "James Franklin, you're under arrest for assaulting a police officer," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As Sarah continued the Miranda warning, Reyes recovered and radioed for backup. Diane Franklin stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "He's not usually like this. He lost his biggest contract last week, and when he drinks." "You don't have to apologize for him, ma'am," Sarah said gently as she maintained control of the still struggling Franklin. "And you don't have to live like this either. We can help you." By the time the backup arrived to transport Franklin to the station, Sarah had convinced Diane to let the paramedics examine her wrist, which turned out to be sprained, not broken. She'd also helped her pack a bag to stay with her sister for a few days and connected her with the local Women's Resource Center. Back at the station, as Sarah completed the paperwork for Franklin's arrest, Chief Diaz stopped by her desk. "Good work today, Mitchell," she said. "Reyes says you handled yourself like a pro out there." "Just did what needed doing," Sarah replied, uncomfortable with the praise. "Well, it was impressive for a rookie." Diaz paused. though I suspect it wasn't your first time dealing with volatile situations. Sarah kept her eyes on the form she was filling out. No, ma'am. Thought not. Diaz leaned against the desk. Franklin's lawyer is already here, by the way, Carson Bennett, local hotshot who thinks he runs this town because his daddy was mayor 20 years ago. Just a heads up. He's going to try to make this about you being a woman, not about his client being a violent drunk. Wouldn't be the first time, Sarah said with a slight shrug. I can handle it. Diaz studied her for a moment. I believe you can. Just remember you're not alone in this. The whole department has your back. The words were simple, but they hit Sarah with unexpected force. In the military, having someone's back was a given, a sacred trust. In civilian life, she'd grown accustomed to feeling isolated, even in a crowd. The reminder that she was part of a team again warmed something inside her that had been cold for too long. 3 days later, Sarah found herself in the Riverdale County Courthouse, preparing to testify at Franklin's bail hearing. The charges, assault on a police officer and domestic battery, were serious enough to potentially keep him in custody until trial, but only if the judge agreed. The courtroom was smaller than Sarah had expected, with wooden benches worn smooth by years of anxious spectators. She sat in the front row, her uniform pressed and perfect, watching as other cases were called before Franklin's. Chief Diaz sat beside her, offering silent support. When Franklin's case was finally called, he shuffled in from a side door, wearing an orange jumpsuit that somehow made him look smaller than he had on his front porch. His attorney, Carson Bennett, was everything Diaz had warned: expensive suit, confident swagger, and a smile that never reached his cold eyes. Judge Walter Harmon presided, a man in his 60s with a reputation for being fair but strict. Sarah had been warned by Rays that Harmon was old school, but respected officers who knew their jobs. Your Honor, Bennett began after the charges were read, my client is a respected businessman in this community, a family man with deep roots in Riverdale who poses absolutely no flight risk. We request release on his own recognizance pending trial. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jessica Chen, argued for a substantial bail, citing the violent nature of the arrest and Franklin's history of alcohol abuse. Then came the part Sarah had been dreading. Furthermore, Bennett continued, I'd like to question the circumstances of my client's arrest. Mr. Franklin was confronted in his own home by an inexperienced female officer who escalated the situation unnecessarily. Sarah felt her jaw tight as Bennett went on to paint her as overly aggressive, suggesting that a more experienced male officer might have diffused the situation without physical confrontation. Officer Mitchell has been with the department for less than 2 months, Bennett said. Prior to that, she had no law enforcement experience. I suggest her handling of this situation reflects poor training and perhaps a desire to prove herself at my client's expense. Judge Harmon looked toward Sarah, his expression unreadable. Officer Mitchell, please approach the stand. I'd like to hear your account of the events. Sarah took a deep breath and walked forward. After being sworn in, she recounted the events clearly and factually, describing Franklin's aggressive behavior, his assault on Rays, and the subsequent arrest. And you felt it necessary to physically restrain Mr. Franklin rather than continue verbal de-escalation? Judge Harmon asked. Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Franklin had already physically assaulted Officer Rays and was lunging toward me. Department protocol in such situations is clear. Bennett approached for cross-examination, his smile predatory. Officer Mitchell, how much do you weigh? Objection, Chen called. Relevance. I'm establishing the physical disparity between the officer and my client, Bennett replied smoothly. I'll allow it, Harmon said. Answer the question, officer. 140 pounds, Sarah replied evenly. And my client is approximately 200 pounds, yet you claim you felt threatened enough by him to take him to the ground. His weight is irrelevant to whether he posed a threat, Sarah countered. He had already assaulted another officer and was charging at me. Bennett changed tactics. Officer Mitchell, before joining the Riverdale Police Department, what was your occupation? I served in the United States Army. As what exactly? A secretary, cook. Sarah felt heat rising in her face but kept her voice level. I was a combat medic with the 68 Whiskey MOS, attached to an infantry unit. And did that role involve any actual combat experience, or were you safely behind the lines? Before Chen could object, Judge Harmon interrupted. Mr. Bennett, I fail to see the relevance of the officer's military service to this hearing. Your Honor, I'm attempting to establish whether Officer Mitchell might have a predisposition to overreact in stressful situations based on prior experiences. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. Bennett was actually trying to use her military service against her, implying that it made her less reliable rather than more qualified. Judge Harmon seemed equally unimpressed. I'll allow limited questioning on this topic, but move it along, Counselor. Bennett turned back to Sarah. Officer Mitchell, isn't it true that women in combat roles are often placed under immense pressure to prove themselves equal to their male counterparts? Objection, Chen stood. Counsel is making sexist generalizations, not asking relevant questions. Sustained, Harmon said. Bennett barely paused. Let me rephrase. Officer Mitchell, in your experience, did you ever feel you needed to be more aggressive to earn respect from male colleagues? Sarah met his gaze directly. No. In the military, as in police work, what earns respect is competence and courage, not aggression. Courage, Bennett repeated, his tone making the words sound hollow. Yet you felt it necessary to physically subdue a man in his own home, in front of his wife, rather than de-escalate the situation. Some might call that excessive force rather than courage. Objection, Chen called again. Withdrawn, Bennett said with a dismissive wave. I have no further questions for this witness. As Sarah returned to her seat, Judge Harmon studied her thoughtfully before turning his attention back to Bennett and Franklin.